Okay, welcome back, folks. We're not going to pick up discussion. I want to give folks an update on where the BAA memo happens to be, because I'm sure there are people in the room who want to know that as well. I'm still working on it. It turned out to be longer than I anticipated, because trying to capture the conversation that we had and the concerns that we had in the areas and the things that we're recommending and why. So it always ends up being longer than anticipated. And Nolan was getting additional information for me about the 9+ million at Dale. It's not, so to confirm, it's not really an additional request for nursing facilities. It is carry forward from FY25. And so it's just about spending authority. So the way they presented it, it looks like it's an additional request, but it's not. And then, so you will see that. I'm going to ask Lori to adjust the agenda for tomorrow morning, because I am doing testimony after the floor on Thursday, I believe is when I'm doing it, or Thursday afternoon. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm doing testimony in House Appropriations. So obviously, I want you all to see the memo before I testify in House Appropriations. So that is what we're going to be doing first thing at 9 a.m. Okay. And then we'll move to 5:45. And Lori and I will talk about agenda a little bit, because I think that we're probably going to have additional. I'm not sure if we can get Katie back to review the changes that we just went through. Hopefully we can. And Lori, if we need to if she's available at 9, but not later, we can switch around the BAA memo thing. Okay. Okay. All right. So now, so I alluded to on FY27 that, not like there's any kind of real sort of normal business. There really is no business as usual when it comes to the budget. And this is not going to be any different than that. And so, I think we're all accustomed to, particularly in this committee, seeing the needs of Vermonters that exceed the money that we have available. And so we oftentimes have to make decisions about the recommendations that we'll make. So what's different this year is, for the last several years, there's been, honestly, a lot of federal money. We've had stable and, healthy Vermont revenues as well. So we are anticipating on Friday, the E-Board is meeting, and we're anticipating a downgrade in the Vermont revenues. We've seen from the Joint Fiscal Office, I get a revenue report every month, and we've seen, it's noticeable. I don't expect it to be huge, but it is noticeable about the declines that we are seeing. And I guess I would call it a softening. So one thing to understand is that the billions of dollars that have come into Vermont in the COVID era they have not only, some of them came through here, but not all of them. That's part of what people need to understand. And that has also had an impact on the revenues that the state then gets back through sales tax, through other things like that. So that money is pretty much gone. Okay, so that's having an impact on our revenue. We're seeing nationally that things are, in flux. You're seeing the Federal Reserve and the president having disagreements about interest rates, and we're seeing, all sorts of things out there that are causing some unrest for people, and sort of all of the markets out there that control our economy. And so when I referenced earlier that, we'll need to do things a little bit differently than we have the last few years, what we have been doing is looking to our committee to make sure that the Appropriations Committee understands what the needs of Vermonters are. So we have put essentially what we felt the most pressing needs of Vermonters were in our budget memo. If you look back, our budget memo is rather lengthy. We go into quite a bit of detail in a number of areas in all 3 of our departments. And I'm not saying that we aren't going to do that this year, but in addition to that, we really are going to have to prioritize. Okay, so we're going to have to say, I'll just use, for example, I am sure that we will hear from providers that they're going to need a cost of living adjustment. That is something that the administration, in my both history here in the building and history in state government, has never been proposed by an administration. It doesn't matter if it's Republican, Democratic, or whatever. They rely on the legislature to make that adjustment, if that happens. So I'm sure that we'll hear from providers about that. We have a couple of outstanding. They're relatively small, but they're important. So we'll be seeing, I've already started to receive requests for things like at Dale, the support services program for people who are deafblind. Okay, relatively small number of people, relatively small amount of money, has a huge impact. And that has pretty much gone away. And we had a bill that we took testimony on last year about that. And so I have asked Dan and Todd to make sure that they look into that. I'm not anticipating that being in the governor's recommend. It'd be great if it were, but we'll see. So that the other thing that is hopefully a clear priority for the committee is something that we've already started to take testimony on, a report that we received, and that is on the supervised visitation services for individuals who have been ordered by the courts to supervise visitation. And we know that in several counties, the sort of whole central part of the state, that's non-existent. And that is a significant issue. Anne has pointed that out when she and Brenda, and the reason we got that report is frankly because of the language that they put in to the Budget Act that our committee recommended last year. So what we don't have yet, and I think as we pointed out to the deputy commissioner last week from DCF, is that they in fact didn't answer the question, which was how much would it cost? And so we will be looking for how much that costs. I hope that rises to a level of priority. Those are, I guess, what I would call relatively small things that can have big impacts on the lives of the people that are impacted by those. We will receive requests. I'm already starting, and I'm sure you will all receive requests to meet with different groups, whether it's in substance use, whether it's in long-term care, whether it's in child welfare or child care, homelessness, all across the spectrum of what we do. You'll receive requests to meet, and people are going to give you their best shot at trying to get you to recommend something here. And, we're going to hear a lot of testimony as a full committee, which in the past, we've just really only heard from the department, but I am going to structure this a little bit differently this year. So I'm going to be asking the teams to recommend which community partners we hear from directly. So those that are rising to your estimation as the team covering that part of the budget that we need to hear from directly. It doesn't guarantee them any, leg up in our ultimate recommendations, but they sort of pass the first muster with the teams, and you're recommending that they appear before the full committee. So yeah.
Do you want to put a number on that? Like, if you're just going to give them how many should we recommend to you? Like, we're the gatekeepers, obviously, and what would you like to see? How much time for each part of the budget? Or maybe you want to just get back to us on that.
I anticipate that there's going to be quite a number that you might recommend. So we will tell witnesses that they have 15 minutes, a maximum of 15 minutes to present their case. I'm not going to give you a limit on the number of organizations because that would be sort of an arbitrary limit. So I think that I'm relying on your expertise in that area to bring forth that. And of course, you'll be lobbied hard by those organizations. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the Appropriations Committee also has a different process for the administration to come in and present in a different way than they have in the past. So I'm just wondering how we're going to shift our practices if that doesn't happen. right?
Mhm.
Like, because we've had some experience, not all, but there's been times where there's been a request and it just, the presentations are still not as detailed or, kind of follow the instructions and the direction given by appropriation. So I'm just wondering, like, if we get a department come in and just present ups and downs, like, what, do we have a process in place to say, like, that's not enough? You've been instructed to provide more information and more detail on.
So I think everybody's familiar, is everybody familiar with what the Appropriations Committee sent out? They sent a copy of that to all members, so everybody should have received it, back a little while ago, what they asked of each department. If you did not, let me know and I'll dig up the memo and send it out to you. So we don't know if the departments are going to comply or not. I mean, that's the long and the short of it until after January 20th, after next week. So I think that kind of regardless of whether they do or not, we have to do our due diligence. And does that mean, are there things that we may recommend that money be transferred, to? Is there something that you are aware of through your investigation that perhaps we should consider for a different priority? That's a hard decision. That's a hard recommendation to make. But it would be better made by a committee who's going to delve a little bit deeper than the Appropriations Committee has time to do. So, I can tell you that if we don't get what we hope to get from the administration, then we are relying on the expertise that sits around this table. And that expertise, and of course, what we hear from our community partners and their advocates, and what you hear from families, and all of that will help guide us in the questions that we need to ask and dig deeper on. Will we be perfect? No, we won't be perfect. But if you are aware of things that you have some concerns about whether it's achieving the most effective outcomes or the best use of a limited dollar, particularly as it relates to state funds. Okay, so this really is a question about state funds, how we utilize those state funds. I want you to feel free to bring those here to the table to have that discussion. And the full committee may agree, we may not agree, but bring them here. And of course, I'm available to assist in any way that I can through that process. Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Thanks. Yeah. As part of that, I guess I'm thinking, there are things that we even have started working on or have looked at that when there's a change of session and people change, you lose the even brief institutional history about testimony and why they were being raised. I'm wondering about, I know one example because Jubilee and I have worked on the transition foster care or kids who actually were not eligible for DCF custody, but who have needs. And we were very conscious last fall as we were working on that funding to add to critical components might not at all be available, but that there were statutory changes that just one small example, it's a legal change around the judiciary having a role in validating these kids for supervision. That would be a change in our statute that would enable access to additional federal funding, probably requires matching funds and therefore might not be able to go forward with seeking funding this year. But if that legal changes in statute, it would enable when funds became available to move ahead without wasting another year or two making the legal changes. And there's some other examples of that beyond that particular project. And I'm wondering, or maybe I'm advocating for, that there might be some things that we ought to do in statute, not as language in the appropriations bill, so not to connect as, this is for money purposes, but that would be statutory changes that would enable the ability in future years to look at whether funding could be available.
100% agree. And I anticipate that we will have, I guess what I'm calling a miscellaneous DCF bill. Because I think that there are going to be a few things like that. And I think we have a vehicle on the board now that's a short form bill that we can use for, a few of those, I guess what I would call miscellaneous changes. And just as an FYI, some of these things, and you may have seen, the press report on DCF yesterday. It's not, the issues were not uncommon, not unexpected, unfortunately. But we are going to have a joint hearing with House Energy and Technology about updates on the CWIS system and new technology. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because at least as the federal programs stand right now, we actually could have access to more resources for children in this situation and youth. But absent the ability to provide the reporting that's required, because our systems are so outdated, we can't do that. And so there's a prime example of, I think we should be a bit probably more directive when it comes to the technology aspects and updates than we have been. That would be another example of something that would be included in this kind of miscellaneous DCF bill. So yeah, I think that's a good point, Anne. And we will look, and if other people have things that sort of fall into that miscellaneous DCF realm, feel free to bring those up either as part of these budget or in other conversations, because we have a couple of things that are up on the wall that I think that we want to take some action on, but don't necessarily warrant the whole bill up themselves. So thanks for bringing that up. Son, I'm just looking to you because this is, we're having this talk sort of partly in response to your request, and I just wondering if you have any particular questions that
no, it's very helpful what you're describing about the overview about the framing. I was thinking mostly about priorities and how do we how will we, other than just our own personal votes, are there ways that we as a committee will be looking at or addressing that here? So it's great.
I'll give you a real-time example. Okay, so the state was just notified that it's going to lose $3.5 million in SAMHSA grants at the Department of Health that affect among other things, substance use prevention work. So we don't know the details of that yet. I don't know if that is all states, and it's for federal fiscal year 26. We're working on a continuing resolution essentially for fiscal year 26. We have an impending potential government shutdown. If a resolution on the 26 appropriation can't be reached. So, those are all things that are impacting, what we talk about. In DCF, again, talking about childcare, there's threats to withhold payments on childcare until we provide proof of our oversight. We'll be asking DCF what proof is being requested. My guess is they'll say we don't know yet, because that's kind of the way things have happened. On SNAP, at least, we have a full year appropriation, so I don't think that we will, fingers crossed, need to be dealing with that, at least.
Well, I do have a question. When Ann was talking, I wondered about the notion of we have the e-board that can act if necessary when things are in or out of emergency, might be a way to think of it. But the kinds of issues that she's talking about where we need changes in policy in order to move quickly. And it strikes me that I don't know if there's a mechanism by which we could propose a quick motion, but statute won't allow it unless we change statute, which would immediately slow a process down. I wonder if there's
I'm not sure, I'm getting what you're saying.
well, I'm just imagining when we think about spending money, it's about appropriate spending money. But if there are programs, if we suddenly determine that because of the nature of what we're looking at from the federal government right now, are there protections that we want to put in place for Vermonters that we don't currently have? Or that in order to do them, we have to introduce bills and go through this long, complicated process? Are there ways of shortening that?
I see.
Yeah.
Yes and no, I will say, because, I'll use SNAP as an example. Okay, so, last year, the General Assembly, set aside money, in case there were, impacts from federal changes that we couldn't predict at the time, because we didn't know what was going to happen, right? The SNAP changes happened. We had all of that disarray during November, and the Joint Fiscal Committee and the E-Board, and the E-Board includes the governor's office, just to remind people, recommended that Vermont utilize out of those kind of funds that we had set aside in case of federal changes, that we utilize some one-time money to put out to individuals in need of food assistance. So we did that. The difference, and so could we, for instance, say, I guess I'm understanding you, so to sort of preempt that, saying like, if a similar thing occurs in November of 2026, can we legislatively put language in and say, the state of Vermont shall do something similar?
I mean, for me, excuse me, but for me, 545 is an example of actions that.
We're taking,
Yeah,
it's reactionary and proactive at the same time.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking if it needed to be proactive rather than reactionary.
Yeah, the problem is that there are so many things in flux.
Yeah.
It is very, very difficult to predict what may or may not happen.
Yeah.
And I didn't finish my story. No, it's okay. The rest of the story is we are much more likely to have less funds to be able to make that set aside.
Uh-huh.
Okay. There's right now continuing dialogue about, there is some one-time money left over from, not left over, but surplus from FY25 that the governor wants to use to buy down property taxes. The legislature and the governor are still in negotiations, and that'll happen right up until the end. If that money is utilized to do that, pretty much eliminates any one-time money available to do anything else to react to some of those federal responses. Personally, I'm not sure that's the absolute best decision, but we'll see. I mean, that's all still in flux.
Yeah.
So,
I understand.
so the answer is yes, but probably not as much as we were able to do last year is the real truth of the matter. And so things like, this 3.5 million that we just learned of about SAMHSA. We have seen the administration make reductions in appropriations for FY25. Try to. States push back. Because remember, it's Congress that gets to appropriate. They have the power of the purse in Congress. The president cannot unilaterally decide what is going to be funded and what is not going to be funded after a budget has been passed.
Right.
Okay. So when states have pushed back, the courts have agreed with states. We're in a different ball of wax. All we have is FY25 is gone. Okay. We're in FY26 and we have continuing resolution. We don't have a Congress approved budget. So the sands are shifting underneath us right now. And yeah, states have to be flexible, I guess is the word. So, for people who I know are around the room listening and those who are listening online, we will take more testimony as a full committee than we have in the past few years around community partner input. It'll be similar to what we did for BAA, but it'll be reliant upon the recommendations from our teams. Okay, so you'll bring the recommendations based upon the work that you're doing to fully understand the department's, each department's budget or each portion of the department's budget. And you'll bring that forward in terms of recommendations. And then for people listening around, you'll have about 15 minutes to make your case to the full committee about what it is that you're asking for. But I think it's important for the whole committee to hear that emergence of things coming from our community partners. Yeah, go ahead.
This is more big picture, but I know it affects a lot of the organizations in the community that ultimately come through our committee. Are there discussions happening to help, I know we could have another shutdown on February 1st. And I know like in my work, we're thinking about that and preparing for that. I'm just wondering, are we doing any, is there any planning being done to help? Things are divisive and this may be something we see more often. And I know reserves are dwindling, grants are getting cut, so it's harder to fill reserves. And I'm just wondering if there's conversations about how we can help these organizations that we depend on as the state to do a lot of our business for us, help them kind of weather those challenges
Yeah.
each year.
There actually are some discussions happening right
Okay,
now
good.
around the state housing authority, for instance,
Yeah.
and the local housing authorities. And they've been utilizing local funds, local administrative funds, reserves. And I think you'll see some sort of recommendation out of the appropriations committee that seeks to address part of that in the BAA, I think. I doubt that it's going to be the full amount that they're asking for.
I'm thinking more, I know some states have like basically a loan fund for organizations, if there's a shutdown, we won't be able to pay, maybe you can't pay your rental assistance, or you'll eventually be able to when the government reopens. So it's just kind of like short-term cash for these organizations that tend to be small, that may not be able to survive, especially as we start seeing it once a year, twice a year, that we have these shutdowns and these huge gaps that they have to try and find funds to keep their organizations afloat until the government reopens, and then they. So that's what I was
That's what
wondering
you're
about.
thinking about. Yeah, I have not heard that as
Okay.
a potential option. I know that it's related, but only sort of. The financial relief fund that we appropriated last year, $10 million for community organizations
Yep.
to have access to. And we got a report earlier this year about how that fund is doing. It's, with the things that are pending, I think it's pretty much been utilized. And so I think, kind of, I guess, apropos to what you're saying, we'll probably see more of that kind of thing as being necessary.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there wasn't anything additional asked for in the BAA, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, that there exists potential for that to be there for FY 27 as well, because I think that is it's an equity issue for me. Again, nursing homes have been the only ones to have access to that, and then it was a squeaky wheel, like Brattleboro Hospital and or Springfield Hospital, and some of the Valley Vista has been one that things that sort of make their way up to the administration as critical, and some of our smaller providers are just as critical.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's why I raise it is,
Yeah.
I know.
the amount of
many
support
were
that could help would be
barely,
very
able to hang on
yeah.
in the fall. And I worry about what a potential, just a few months later, that could do to them.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So I think
love to
we'll-
have more conversation about that.
Yeah, when Secretary Samuelson comes in, I think it's a good for the
Okay.
budget. I think it's a good question to ask, and exactly what are the parameters for access to those funds? And Are they looking to extend them? Are they looking to make them, potentially available? My understanding is that you kind of have to be on the verge of closing kind of thing. But what if it's a temporary thing,
Yeah.
Problem is with the federal government, we don't know what's going to be temporary and what's not going to be
Yeah.
temporary.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any other thoughts or, any other sort of, yeah, go ahead, Doug.
I'll just say that during this conversation, the thought going through my mind is, where can we identify funding requests that have, if you will, a multiplier effect? You mentioned, and sort of direct multiplier or not losing a multiplier. You mentioned the State Housing Authority, and if I remember correctly from their testimony in October, what we do in 1 year impacts the following year. So we lose opportunities for vouchers. We don't take advantage and exercise the use or fund them this year. So that's an example, if you will, of funding something so that we prevent further harm the following year. So that's just a thought I have as I'm looking through is where can we find opportunities with multipliers?
Yeah.
So some of them more direct than others. I think we are facing through HR 1 changes to Medicaid and processes related to Medicaid and whether people are going to ultimately therefore fall off of that. So how do we spend money wisely to prevent that so we ensure that Vermonters have healthcare? Again, sort of a multiplier.
Right, and I think that everybody on this committee has received, a copy of the request for the community agencies to, they're not calling me explainers, but they came up with some assisters, thank you.
Yeah.
I think everybody's received a copy of that request, and that's actually along those lines, so I think that we need to be asking the questions of AHS. How do you intend to assist individuals in understanding the changing implications of the Medicaid program? Because they're big, and they affect a lot of people that this committee is responsible for. And frankly, I just don't see AHS as being able to do that on their own.
Right. And then how is that data reported back? Because the work requirements, volunteer requirements.
How are we going to track that?
How are we going to track it? How is that going to get reported so that we don't find ourselves having clawbacks? Because it's not outside of a percentage of variance that they allow.
Yeah. That just made me think of something. So, when we had the SNAP and the refugee discussion back in October in our committee, our committee as a whole felt that the department had acted precipitously in removing certain people from the roles. Well, it turns out that was true. I think that while on one hand, they were trying to make some assurances that they didn't exceed an error rate and we're implementing things as quickly as possible. On the other hand, it turned out not to be accurate. And so in the meantime, lots of people were impacted by that. And we spent state money on something that we didn't actually have to spend state money on. So sometimes that quick action can have the negative impact. We need to, I think in our questions and our inquiries, we need to ask about things like that because we will have this will be continual. And it's not just with this federal administration. That happens, with any time there's a federal change, there are different priorities for different administrations. So understanding how our in-state folks interpret those things. And then, while we act responsibly, we have to make sure that that responsiveness is not, I guess, what I would call overkill. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And I really appreciate people thinking about this from the perspective of your budget assignments and how that's going to impact your conversations with the departments that you will be talking with. just, know that you're not in that alone. Okay, so, you've got the support of the whole committee and, that we will, do our best, to make the best, decisions around recommendations as we can. And Vermonters are expecting us to do that. So, think within your areas of expertise and within your areas that you have responsibility for. Are there things where you can save money? Are there things that you think are critical? And, to use Doug's analogy, have a multiplier effect, that, can be seen as a positive impact, or if we don't do it, can be seen as a multiplier negative impact, likewise. So, and then recognizing that the other things that we have up on that board that may require resources will be difficult this year. Can I think about something more positive to end on?
That's good.
I know. Thank you for all the work on H545 this morning. Anne's got something. Yes, go ahead, Anne.
Just a little request when we finish up and go offline, a totally non-legislative thing I'd like to say.
Okay. All right. I think we're good. Lori, we can go offline.